their single action by the British. One incensed partisan exclaimed, "It was only on Bloody Sunday that I thought, we got to meet violence with violence here. And even if I'm going to be killed on the streets." Bloody Sunday is a defining moment in the IRA because, like before that, they had no legitimacy. After that, they had legitimacy. The interplay of terrorists with multiple audiences is particularly relevant in analyzing the terrorism that most concerns us today. That of violent Islamist extremists directed against the United States. This threat was seared into our consciousness above all by 9/11. In 1996 and 1998, Osama bin Laden issued warnings that he was targeting America because it supported Israel against the Palestinians, stationed troops within the sacred land of Saudi Arabia, and conducted a campaign designed to humiliate and kill Muslims. The crux of the issue is his conviction that the United States is part of a Crusaders Zionist alliance, that is a quote you see a lot in the literature, dedicated to a war against Islam. This is the terrorists' narrative, the story they construct that explains their motives and justifies their actions. To the degree that the body of Muslim believers, the Ummah, accept this narrative, the Ummah accept al-Qaeda's attacks as justified, or even as moral imperatives, because jihad is legitimate in defense of Islam. Control the narrative, and you control the future. In order to gain Muslim support for al-Qaeda and its goals, bin Laden must advance the narrative. Did the 9/11 attacks provoking U.S. reprisals advance the narrative and gain supporters for Islamist extremists? Was the invasion of Afghanistan and later of Iraq Americans' Bloody Sunday? The answer to this remains a matter of debate. In the most recent authoritative book tracing the war on terror, the longest war, the enduring conflict between America and al-Qaeda, author Peter Bergen dismisses any assertion that bin Laden was trying to use terrorist jujitsu on the United States. Bergen argues that for bin Laden, the attack was not undertaken to incite massive retaliation, but rather the terrorists believed that it would be damaging enough in itself. He was convinced America was so weak-willed that the 9/11 attacks would serve as a kind of magnified Black Hawk Down, and the Americans would back off from meddling in Middle Eastern affairs, just as they withdrew from Somalia. Yet, in the longest war, Bergen presents very little evidence to make his case, and there remains important testimony to the contrary. In a 1996 interview conducted by Abdul Bari Atwan, bin Laden insisted that he wanted to bring the Americans to fight on Muslim soil. In discussing the October 2000 attack on the USS Cole, the 9/11 Commission report referred to evidence that bin Laden expected and desired U.S. retaliation. The report concluded, according to the source, bin Laden wanted the United States to attack, and if it did not, he would launch something bigger. Ahmed Zaidan, Pakistani correspondent for al-Qaeda, spoke to bin Laden's most important lieutenant, Mohammed Atef, in February 2001, when Atef then described al-Qaeda's strategy. He was explaining to me what's going on in the coming years. There are 2 or 3 places in the world which are the most suitable places to fight Americans: Afghanistan, Iraq, and Somalia. We are expecting the United States to invade Afghanistan, and we are preparing for that. We want them to come to Afghanistan. Such testimony can't be easily dismissed. In addition, the notion that particularly strong American reprisals were not considered a risk by bin Laden runs counter to Bergen's own reports that the U.S. warned the Al-Qaeda about, warned the Taliban about what would happen to Afghanistan should Al-Qaeda attack again. And the Taliban took these threats very seriously. Mullah Omar actually went to bin Laden and asked him to leave Afghanistan. Now, Mullah Omar later recanted his view, well, changed his mind is a better word, but there's no way that bin Laden could not realize that the Taliban expected an American reprisal in force should there be another major Taliban attack. Frankly, I believe that bin Laden did have this in mind, but that is a question that's still out. But it makes sense. But even if a particular terrorist miscalculates the impact of outrage on provoking reprisals, that does not invalidate my emphasis on outrage. In fact, outrage has an inevitable impact similar to that of fate in a Greek tragedy. Regardless of the hopes of the characters in this political drama, outrage will exert its influence. The wise take this into account. Bin Laden might or might not have been wise in 2001, but regardless of his wisdom, America may have overreacted in Afghanistan and certainly did overreact in Iraq less than 18 months later. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 was at least facilitated by American popular outrage, if not caused by it. Now here I'm going to crawl way out on a limb. You are welcome to chop it down during the Q&A. I assume everyone in this room is aware of the Bush administration's unjustified rationale for invading Iraq and overthrowing Saddam Hussein. Even Bush is aware of them now. It is not my job here to argue that the administration pushed for war because it was enthralled with neoconservative dogma, because it honestly but wrongly was convinced of that what it wanted to believe, or because it had its own secret agenda while consciously deceiving the American people. All I want to address is the degree to which outrage helped to impel the rush to war. Frankly, I believe that many Americans bought the argument for war because they wanted to strike out against somebody. We had taken down the Taliban in Afghanistan, but failed to bag bin Laden. With a tone that matched theirs, Bush offered Americans another way to vent their moral outrage. This may be very superficial, but consider the closing words of Toby Keith's song. We'll put a boot up your you-know-what, and it's the American way. Compare this to Bush's remarks recorded that he made to Cheney in 9/11. We're going to find out who did this, and we're going to kick him in the ass. Many Americans were looking for a behind to boot, and Bush gave us one in Iraq. He also captured something very American when he issued what seemed like a barroom challenge on the 2nd of July, 2001. My answer is, bring them on. When the president claimed that bin Laden, that Saddam Hussein was linked to 9/11 attacks, it mattered little that some protested, including a sprinkling of politicians, academics, and even ex-military. The fact is, Americans were already receptive to Bush's accusations that Saddam was guilty